Many of us have heard the analogy of the Buddha's teachings being like a sort of tool belt, where you have various tools that you can adapt to deal with sort of the conundrums of our existence. How the Buddha describes our experience around suffering or discontent or dissatisfaction, the cause of that, the ending of that, and the path. And I think it's a very good analogy, because if you think about what it is we're doing, it's not really possible to use just one thing. We have to try to deal with our minds in many different ways, because the presentation of what we experience is often varied and requires a lot of skill with how we deal with these experiences. So in popular culture, mindfulness is something that receives a lot of press, a lot of attention, and it's of course one of the factors of the Eightfold Path. And when it's used, it has an effect of allowing those who use it to experience, sometimes for the first time, what it's like to be in the present moment, when we aren't obsessed about the past or the future, or even having a particular obsession with what the present moment is, how we're experiencing that. So it allows us to keep that experience in mind continuously as it's unfolding before us. And so when people are often thinking about some future event or trying to plan something, and this just becomes a broken record, sati or mindfulness, and also what we often bring in with it, or what should always be brought in with it, is sampajanya, which is clear knowing or clear understanding. It's quite beneficial for us, because it allows us to just keep what it is that's skillful in our minds. And so we've heard a lot about it, and it has such a good effect that it's sort of very popular now. And of course we know that it can be used for things that aren't so skillful sometimes, so we could have maybe paying attention to things that aren't that helpful for us. Or it could be used as a way to cut off our experience from what it is that's unskillful. So a popular topic is like the use of mindfulness in the military. So soldiers can be mindful of their bodies when they're in one way or another carrying out their tasks, which could include killing other people. And yet when they're more mindful of their bodies while they're doing this, they tend to experience less post-traumatic stress. And so we see that there are ways that this can be used, and of course that sounds very good, but what's the method it's being used for? It's not very good. And we can see in our own meditative practice that using something like this is quite beneficial for us. But because there's such a focus on one thing, it can ignore so many other factors of the path that the Buddha teaches. It is a very good tool. It's like a hammer. If you have a hammer, it's an excellent tool. But then we know that the world is not just made of nails and things to pound nails into. So one of the things that the Buddha talks about that's quite essential and gets a little less focus put on it is something called yoniso manasikara, and we were talking about it the other day at tea time. And this tool or skill that we can learn is actually so important that the Buddha said that without it there is no possibility of awakening. There's no possibility of entering the stream. He said it's essential to clarify yoniso manasikara, to understand it and clarify it and essentially use it appropriately in order to truly penetrate what's known as stream entry. And so it's interesting that I think in monastic circles it can get a little bit more attention. I think in Lumpur Pasno will talk about it, and we hear various other teachers talk about it. But what yoniso manasikara is, it's really like tracing back the cause of things, or the origin, trying to really see where it is that we're essentially getting into trouble, and how we can change the way we're looking at that so that we can really understand a different perspective. So yoniso is like, I think the word comes from a similar word meaning womb. It can also be translated, as I said, as origin, the beginning of something, where something comes from. And manasikara is a particular type of attention, the attention we give something. So we can call it like the origin of attention or the womb of attention. But another way that it's used is like wise attention or appropriate attention, which would mean that there is unwise attention, there is inappropriate attention. And there's many ways that yoniso manasikara has been taught by the Buddha. It's taught in terms of dependent origination. It's taught in terms of how we understand the khandhas, how we understand contact, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. A very big focus is on how we understand dukkha, anicca, and anatta, and subha, so like suffering and discontent and dissatisfaction and impermanence, not being sure about things, and self, how we have a sense of an essential form of who and what we are, and also how we are attracted to things or repelled by things, how we see things often as very beautiful or unbeautiful. And there's also the element of how we understand the factors of awakening. Dhammavichaya is one of them, the investigation of Dhamma, which is another way of the investigation of experience and how we can analyze that. Or factors of things like rapture and equanimity, mindfulness. So it's really a tool that you can see that it's quite varied, can be used on different levels, but it's really like it comes from sort of efforting, I would say, a way that one can actually apply something, not just through observation. So there's an actual intention of the mind with trying to kind of change the lens. So this can be in the first instances that one of the instances I was mentioning was like in areas of dukkha, anicca, and anatta, and subha. So like often our minds can get very much caught up into what we think is beautiful or right or correct. It can be about our views being particularly the right view that we think is correct, but it could also be the wrong view by Dhamma. So we might, for example, think of a particular person in our life who we just see the actions that they carry out, and we think, oh, there's very unskillful actions, the way they talk, how they move their bodies. And we might think of some, particular things that they do, and anger can arise. Aversion can arise towards that person. So that would be ayoniso manasikara. Because if anger is arising, then it's not skillful. It's bringing up something that is unskillful. So sati sampajanya would actually identify that, would be able to say, okay, this is anger, this is, with that clear knowing and understanding, we can be aware of the rising of that. but also we're aware, oh, this is an unskillful emotion, unskillful experience. Whereas yoniso manasikara traces back the origin of that. It says, what is the lens I am looking through that is causing this to happen? And it's really a perceptual practice. You can just see, the wrong person or the person that's wrong to you, and then all of a sudden their anger arises. So it's a whole habit that you have forming that movement of mind, and it's because of ayoniso manasikara, that's unwise attention, that anger arises. So we can just see like, oh, what's another way of looking at that person? I can think, well, actually there are some very good traits they have. And then we can begin to actually have an experience of sukha or happiness around seeing a particular person. Whereas before we thought them as something that was a person who's very detrimental to us, that had a very negative effect on us or even other people. So it's something that is it's not an easy tool to use because it goes against the grain of our typical habits, or I should say the grain of our typical unskillful habits. So we might, for example, see someone who is very beautiful to us, and then the mind, in a worldly sense, this seems okay, but if we really identify what that's like, there's craving that arises there, and with craving there is attachment, and if we're not really seeing these as a cause of distress or suffering in a particular way, then we just think this is a normal and good thing for us. And then, of course, when things don't work out in one way or another, then that attachment ends up causing a lot of dukkha. And it's all coming from attraction or a sense of liking. And so in that way, we sometimes will engage in something called asubha. So we look at what's unbeautiful in a situation where we're obsessed with beauty. And this can be around anything. It could be a particular food that we like, or that car that we really want to have, or whatever it might be. Could even be the monastery that we want to go live in someday. So perfect, so wonderful. I just won't suffer there. Any way that our mind moves in a direction that is bringing up craving, attachment, just not seeing things clearly, that's where we have to investigate that and see, like, okay, this is not something that's ultimately skillful. It's bringing up emotions that are leading me in a wrong direction. And so in that way we might say, well, what's unbeautiful about this particular thing that I'm seeing? And in that way we're balancing out our perspective. Like with food, we often can, be concerned with it as something like, oh, I'm going to have the best tasting thing, or something that's, a particular thing that we like, that's sweet, or whatever it might be. But we're not looking at it. Some people might really like meat, and then, not even see that there's an animal that died as a result of that meat being there. So the Buddha actually encourages us to reflect on the animal that's actually being eaten. We can also reflect on how that animal came to the monastery, how that meat came to the monastery, and all of the suffering involved in that, from the people who had to raise the animal suffering itself, those who killed the animal, those who make the machines that kill the animal, the transportation involved, the water used for that animal to drink, for the workers who have to deal with that food, for them to drink, for all the water that's used to wash off the machinery, the trucks, everything that's involved. It's a whole chain of dukkha. And so we see that, maybe this isn't so important. It doesn't mean we don't necessarily eat it, but we say, there's something here that's not, that I'm not seeing very clearly. I'm just seeing some savory taste or something sweet. I think it was, I can't remember, it was maybe Lumpur Phuong who, he was having as a monk, he was having a particular time where he was, his mind was moving out towards, I think, a particular woman very early on in his practice. And he went through his entire life with her, from marrying her and then having a child with her, and then she died, and then he had another, he married another woman, and he had another child with that woman, and then that woman was not favorable to the child he had with the other woman, and there was all of this fighting and just a lot of dukkha. So maybe that wouldn't have actually been the case, but it surely, if we're only thinking of things as working out perfectly and well, and life being very easy in that regard, it's pretty rare that it's that way. Usually takes a lot of effort to make things work out in the worldly realm, and especially really in any realm. And even for people who find it very easy, or they came upon the circumstances in their life that made things quite just easygoing and not difficult at all, there is going to eventually be separation from that. So the Buddha is consistently trying to encourage us to really examine how it is we're seeing our experience, we're seeing the world, the eyes we're looking out of, how we're taking in what it is that we experience, and changing that into a delusion for ourselves. And so he's saying that we have to see clearly through this. And so yoniso manasikara is allowing that. It's bringing us back into balance. We all have, many of us have heard about, this sense of just looking into impermanence, or our sense that we want to have control over our lives. And when we don't have control, there's a lot of worry and concern and suffering around that, dependent on how much we try to control things. And I think most human beings are engaged in this activity in some way or another. We set up the circumstances in our lives to control things as much as possible. And to a certain extent, there is a sense of sort of wise planning or wise use of how we deal with things, but there's also can be an obsessive quality to make sure nothing goes wrong and it's all worked out. So the more we work with this from a level of yoniso manasikara, from a level of wisely attending to things, then whatever it is, we can see through that very clearly. I received a cup of water here that's very nice, and I was surprised that it was heated. And my first reaction was that there's something different here. So it's like, oh, it's heated. I don't want heated water. And then when I drank it, I thought, oh, that's pleasant. It's kind of cool in the room. It's helpful for my throat. And there it was right there. It was just that assumption, this is going to not be good. And I did think right after that, well, I don't know, I'm not sure. Let's see. And this is just a little thing, but it's happening all the time. It happens all the time. And so if we're consistently lending our mind to that, it's like, well, I don't know, I'm not sure, then there it is, that's wise attention. I'm not sure I'm going to hate this person or dislike them, or I'm not sure that the person who I'm obsessed with and really have these strong feelings towards, it can just turn out to be the most horrible thing in the world, you know. And so the more we balance out our understanding, we change the lens, then we get to see that very clearly, and we get the very good results of that. Maybe it's not helpful for me to move in a particular direction that the mind is moving into. And we can see this with how we attribute so much to our sense of self, and a sense of permanence, or having like this sense of like what I am, this myness and me-ness, my things, my feelings. And the more we're able to tease that apart, the less personal we take things. You can see this very clearly in, when there's something like an insult that's directed at ourselves. And so the more that we question that and we try to examine that, we could ask ourselves just simply, well, is that true about me? And if it is, okay, well, that's fair enough. I don't have to worry about how the other person said it, really. Might have been hurtful, but that's their karma, that they have to deal with that. But actually, if they said something that was useful, then that can be a gem. It can be a different way of looking at it. So this is a really wonderful tool to be able to really examine our experience and see the direction that we're moving in and how it is that we can extricate ourselves from that direction when we see that it's not moving us in the right way, moving towards the right place or in the right situation, the right understanding of something. Particularly, one of the ways that we might not see this happening is through, I mentioned the khandhas, but through when we move from perception to what the Buddha calls mental formations. So these are how we fabricate things, how we create things in our own minds. And so that would be simply, as I mentioned, just something like, oh, there's a perception of heat from this cup, and then I think, oh, that's something immediately that becomes a creation. There's something wrong with it. And that just comes from a habit of what came before, an assumption that there should be something else. And it's so quick and it's so fast and so hard to see sometimes that it really is the level that we can work at to kind of unravel the knot of how we have a sense of a mental contact and the pleasantness around that or unpleasantness around that, and we from our own memory have a sense of like, okay, whether this thing, I have an opinion about this, I have a thought about it, I have a movement of my mind towards it. And it's quite helpful to to just consistently try to pay attention to that. And then, as I said, there's some efforting involved with wise attention. How can I tend to this in a particular way so that my mind doesn't pick up on what its usual ways, like that might ignite anger or craving or just being deluded, confused. This can be something like if we're meditating and we're sleepy, we just, maybe we need to figure out what to do in that situation, like look at some bright lights or try to think of something skillful so we activate our minds from a mode of slumber. Or just standing up, going out to walk. Whatever it is, we see the right thing, the right direction we want to move our minds in, and we go there. So this is a tool that is, as I mentioned, is so important that we really don't want to neglect it. And it's interesting, we can think of why it maybe doesn't get so much of a focus or attention, or it's not brought up as much. And I think because it's not a quick fix. It's like a slow burn. It's something that we need to take our time with and use very diligently. And it goes against the habits. It's not very easy to use. But like anything, it can become a habit. It can become something that we find is very useful for us. One of the ways that monastics are encouraged to use yoniso manasikara is around our requisites. We try to use our requisites in a wise way, and that's where the chant that we do, that we recite sometimes, it really points us to, using our cloth requisites wisely. We don't just kind of maybe look for the best possible cloth we can find, or hint to find something better. We try to work on just being satisfied with what there is. And we do that with our kutis. Maybe not always searching for the best kuti or wanting to move to the next one when we're dissatisfied with that one. And one of the ways that very tangibly can be worked with, as I mentioned, is around food. The requisite of food it's something that the mind just can incline towards in a very sensual way. There's no way to really stop pleasant feeling around food, like pleasant taste. You can do it. You can try to make your food taste really bad, but it's not easy. So more it's like, well, what is the movement? How is the mind moving towards that? And so with renunciation, we can move in ways. So, okay, maybe I won't take so much, or I won't take the favorite thing that I like. One of the monks who's well known in our sangha is a very senior monk in Thailand, and he would actually not eat on a particular day if he wasn't able to if he wasn't able to actually maintain mindfulness around when he was eating. So he tried to maintain a very strong focus on his mind, but he was also using that discernment around when he was eating. And then he used that so much that he would say, okay, I'm not going to eat today because I lost mindfulness. he wasn't attending wisely. And of course the next day then the pressure was on. But it sounds like the way he practiced was around it was a good sort of pressure, because he said he wanted to eat. He actually, he had to give his body food. And so it changed the motivation quite a bit. And the practice gave him what sounds like very good fruit, so to speak. So we're basically learning how to balance these perspectives in our mind. So we're not just in a sense of reacting towards what's very typical for us. And so I think that wise attention really it really deserves our wise attention. It deserves our focus. It deserves learning about it and using it and bringing it up as many times a day that we can. You can wake up and just immediately go into this, I'm so tired, and I don't want to get up. Or we can think, oh, well, yeah, there's tiredness, but that'll go away very quickly, and I'm here to really investigate the mind and to enjoy all of the goodness that comes from doing that. So we're arousing different conditions that are really helping us grow, and they're buoying us. They're helping us along in the practice. And so when we engage in this, we have a different sense of really like what the mind is capable of. Because that, I keep using the word habit, but yoniso manasikara, this wise attention, can become such a strong habit that we begin to see things very clearly. And we're no longer fooled by them so much. We know how to balance our own minds so that if even just slight anger is arising, then it's discerned very quickly. And instead sukha, or happiness, can arise. Oh, actually, I'm really grateful for that person. I'm happy that he's around. So it's something that if one in their practice isn't using so much, I really would say it's worth it's really worth looking into, because it really helps us see like where, especially like things around just dukkha and suffering, we get to investigate and understand that a lot more clearly. Oh yeah, this is the cause of that. This is where it's coming from. I don't have to actually increase that. So that, discontentment becomes contentment. And that's all through changing our lens, our focus. So I offer that for some words of reflection tonight.